Okay, is the screen visible? Because little hanging at my eye.
Yes, yes.
Thanks. Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laghu Parashar on behalf of the Smart SUT project of GIZ India and CRDS SEPT Ahmedabad. I welcome all of you in this session of Mobilogues, which is Mobility Dialogue. And this is a third series and the third season of the Mobilogues. And today's session is focused on demystifying the parking management in India. This season of Mobilogues is part of our overall national capacity building program, which Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs announced. And as a GIZ Smart SUT project, we are supporting the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development in this a larger framework of national capacity building program. Within this program, we also launched a executive program was launched by Secretary Maua during the UMI 2020, and in which 28 officials from 17 states and urban territories has joined us in this program, and which include the three modules as a part of training and capacity building. One is the active learning module, action learning module, and the cross learning module. Under this executive program, we already have completed the active learning module part, which comprises 6 days virtual training program. It was a lot of knowledge exchange program with the international and national trainers with the 28 officials. In the second phase of this program, which is the action learning, part, all the participants are working with their respective cities on various issues and challenges pertaining to the urban mobility. So, as name suggests, it is action learning. So, they are supposed to identify the issues and challenges in their respective cities related to the urban mobility, and they are currently working on these areas. So, these are the few themes area where start from the decision making process among various institutions, data aggregation, service quality, gender in the mobility, infrastructure development, branding, communication, and institutional and regulatory aspects. So all these 28 official action learning is across all these theme area. And in next 2 months, we will have these outcomes. We will be seeing the outcomes of this action learning area, and we will see how far and to what extent they manage to create some kind of impact in their respective city. As a part of this National Capacity Building Program, this webinar series is part of that. And we have 7 webinars and 7 topics scheduled as a part of this mobility dialogue. Today it will be focused on demystifying the parking management in India, and almost on an average 15 days we will have each and every topic as a part of the Mobilogues. To start with today's session, we have Mr. Ernst Turing, and Ernst is our cluster coordinator, and he's a graduate civil engineer and specialized in the water. He has been working in GIZ since 1987, and he started his career initially with an international consulting company, worked in the urban infrastructure, including the road design and the construction. And he has all across global experience of the Palestine, Egypt, Tanzania, and his portfolio is the head of water portfolio, and he joined GIZ at the end of 2019. And he managed the entire cluster of sustainable urban and industrial development, which comprises many projects, and Smart SUT is one of the projects. Now, I will request Ernst to inaugurate this Mobilogues with his keynotes. Ernst, over to you.
Thank you, Laghu, and thank you for inviting me to this Mobilogues, which is a new term for me. I've never heard about Mobilogues before, but I think it's a very good idea to have this Mobilogues as a capacity building tool in times of Corona. And I would like to welcome you all to this session. I'm very keen to learn more about the mystics of parking in India. This initiative and this activity is part of the smart urban transport project, which is part of my cluster, and it is also part of the Green Urban Mobility Partnership, which had been established last year by Mr. Modi and Mrs. Merkel. We are now sort of populating this partnership with a number of projects, and SUT, Smart Urban Transport, is part of it, as well as e-mobility and other projects. And of course, there's a bigger part on financial cooperation, whereby the German side would invest 200 million euro per year in mobility projects. According to Mohua, it would be sort of based on a challenge between cities. Now, this capacity building is very important because we are touching upon new areas of cooperation, and the Smart SUT project will be continuing beyond this year. We'll get more funds as well, and we are expanding our activities in the transport sector after all. So this is this Mobilog on parking. I think it's just one small building block within our overall contributions to the transport sector in India. Wish you all the best in this webinar and this Mobilog, and I'm keen to learn what will be the outcome in the end. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ernst, for your nice words. So Mobilog is basically mobility dialogue. So it's a merger of two words which we try to recreate something and replacing the webinar term. Okay. So now with this, I'm handing over the session to our two moderators. One is Professor Shivanand Swami, and other is my colleague Miss Andrea Blumen. And people who are working in this country in urban mobility doesn't need any introduction. At least Professor Swami doesn't need any introduction. This name is pretty much famous and well known. And if I may say a few words about him without reading my computer, so like a man behind a lot of reforms in this country, and a man behind very challenging project like BRTS Ahmedabad and Surat. And if I may say the BRTS man of India, this is Professor Shivanand, a person who brings a lot of changes as far as positive changes as far as urban mobility is concerned in this country, be it at national level reforms, policies, regulatory changes, projects at a city level, and bringing the reforms at a state transportation level. So it's a 360-degree experience, and it's a pleasure that he's here as a moderator. And the second moderator is my colleague Andrea Blumen. So Andrea is urban planner with more than 25 years of experience in the project management of complex planning projects in Berlin. She is also today joining us from the Berlin. She's supposed to be with us here in Delhi, but because of the corona, she could not join us from last 1 year. So she is joining us today from the Berlin. She has worked on a cross-sectoral integrated urban master plan for redevelopment and conversation area, including transport planning, the integrated planning, social and educational infrastructure. Andrea is also steering our Bhubaneswar urban transport portfolio. She is managing and steering with the Bhubaneswar Development Authority and other institutions in the Bhubaneswar, the comprehensive mobility plan, low carbon mobility plan, parking management, and also person responsible for the gender aspects in Smart SUT. So with this, I will hand over the session to Professor Swami and Andrea. Over to you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon. Yeah, thank you, Lagu. Lagu has been a dear colleague and friend, and therefore the kind words he expressed about me is understood. Thank you, sir, and I hope we all need to live up to the descriptions one is given about in this meeting. Yeah, we try and need to be there. Namaskara, good evening, and I'm Professor Swami, from CEPT University. Just a few words about CEPT University. CEPT was established in 1962 as School of Architecture, and it grew into a full-fledged university. It was given a status of university in 2004, and then CEPT also was recognized as a Center of Excellence in Urban Transport in 2009 by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Yeah. Since then, CEPT has been working in the field of sustainable urban planning and management. We have received continuous support from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs as well as GIZ, okay, in carrying out several of our activities. And in these activities, again, we have received in many ways they are our partners. Paul, Anumita, Andrea, and others have always contributed to our programs, and therefore I take this opportunity to welcome these distinguished presenters, Paul Barter, Anumita Roy Chaudhary, Lawrence Kumar, and Srimanta Mishra from Bhubaneswar. Yeah. Friends, today we are talking about these mobility dialogues. These dialogues are about different topics of sustainable urban mobility itself. And today's topic is demystifying parking. When we mention parking, it's a news, it's on the newspaper every day. And I'd like to share with you few news clippings to set the context. And I don't need to speak, actually. They themselves speak a lot about the kind of differing opinions we have about parking. Yeah.
Siraj sir, kindly make sir the presenter.
Yeah, I just did.
As I said, parking is in news every day. This is something which is amazing, you know, it's something which one would, what happens with this? Should you please check this?
I can see it.
You know, it just reads, last student shot dead at Delhi Rohinis after fight over parking. Can we imagine parking and fight and then a man losing his life? And therefore, what parking can create in the minds of the people, not leave aside the spaces. That's an important thing which we need to be keeping memorable. Parking problem is blocking prosperity of Delhi. Just imagine problems of parking and economic growth. That's a link I think is important for us to recognize. And there are cities which would like to build parking and more parking as part of, again, the smart city project. Is it a smart move? I think we need to be asking some questions about it. And then Bangalore decides parking permits in residential areas, where residential associations promote this activity, while others say, why all this parking permits? NDMC, East Delhi Corporation, raises parking rates by 4 times, and there are a lot of people raising hulla about it. Then government plans to slash visitors parking slots in housing societies to 5% in Mumbai. Yeah. And there is another news, underground parking policy viable only in posh colonies or posh areas. Yeah. Another item which I caught my eye, road in front of your house may not be a free park. You will have to pay for if you have to park in front of your house. And therefore, there are several dimensions about parking, whether it is a public infrastructure, it is or a private real estate, whether it should be charged progressively, or it should be free, whether it should be provided by and managed by the government, or it should be managed by the private. The questions are aplenty. And today we have with us to clarify, to demystify several of these issues to us, Anumita Roy, Paul Barter, and then sorry, yeah. And then we have Lawrence Kumar, and then finally we have Mr. Mishra from Bhubaneswar. They will bring us international experiences as well as the national context, and then what is the way forward this parking problem. And with this brief about the context, I invite Ms. Andrea Blumel to take over the floor and invite our presenters, introduce the presenters and invite them for the presentations. Thank you. Andrea, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Professor Swami. Good afternoon to all participants again and to all our speakers of today's session. Thank you also for sharing your experiences with us. I will introduce our speakers step by step, and at first I would like to encourage all participants to pose questions for our speakers in the chat. We have time at the end of the session for a short question and answer round after the presentation. So we have 10, maximum 50 minutes for each presentation. And now I would like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Paul Barter. He is a consultant, a researcher, trainer, writer, and podcaster, best known for his parking policy expertise. And he is an adjunct associate professor of LKY School of Public Policy of the National University of Singapore. He has written extensively on parking policies and published, for example, parking policy in Asian cities. He provided insight to various metropolitan governments as a consultant to international organizations such as World Bank or GIZ. Today, he will speak about the paradigm of parking management in Asian cities. Dear Dr. Barter, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you see my first slide? The
yes.
Make parking policy consistent with sustainable urban mobility. Okay, so thank you very much. I'll just set a timer so I don't go over time.
Very important. I saw the length of your presentation. That's why I mentioned that again.
Okay, so the presentation is a little too long, but I won't be speaking to all of the details, but you'll see at the bottom of this slide a few websites where you can go for more information. And the very final slide will give you some more details of places you can get more information about parking policy and making parking consistent with the other goals of your cities. So first, a very short section on parking basics. A key thing to understand about parking is that it takes a lot of space. At least car parking takes a lot of space. In fact, an off-street parking space, if you count all of the aisles and the ramps and the pillars, is about 30 square meters per parking space, which, believe it or not, is very similar to the space per person, the residential space per person, even in rich European countries or Singapore. It's quite shocking. Bicycle or motorcycle parking is much, much more space efficient. So two-wheeler parking is much less wasteful of space than car parking. Car parking also is very costly to provide. It's often free of charge to the motorist, but in fact, there's a huge subsidy involved there. Anywhere in our cities where the real estate is expensive, parking is expensive, not necessarily for the motorist, but for society. Even surface parking in a busy area is very costly because of the land cost. And if you study this slide, maybe later at your own leisure, you'll be able to see that whether you build a building or go underground or have surface parking, if the land is expensive, you're going to have expensive parking. So in all urban transport thinking, and parking is no exception, we should focus our minds on accessibility, which is how easy we can make it for people to reach the things that they need to reach. Car parking, of course, helps with that, but it only helps with accessibility by car. And as we've already seen, car-based access on the roads or with the parking is very space wasting and economically very inefficient. So instead, it's better to aim for multimodal accessibility. access by various means of transport, including public transport. Sometimes we can increase accessibility to an area by actually decreasing the parking. So many of our cities have parking problems, but what is that problem? What's the fundamental root cause of the problem? Do these places have a parking shortage or a management problem, a parking management problem? I would argue it's a parking management problem because a very short distance, within 50 meters of each of those photographs on the top, I took the photographs on the bottom, off-street parking that was more or less empty. So clearly the problem here was not a shortage of parking, but it was a management problem. Another key basic thing for us to understand is that we want to solve these parking problems, but we don't want to make the mistake of solving our parking problems and make all of our other problems worse, or by contradicting all of our other goals that we have. Most cities say they want more public transport, they want multimodal accessibility, but the parking policies that most cities have contradict those goals. Most cities are trying to get plentiful parking. Unfortunately, that mostly doesn't help with the on-street parking problem, as we just saw. Or if you build so much parking that you solve the on-street parking, then you've got other problems. You've got car dependence. You've really ruined your city. So be careful what you wish for. One slightly odd solution is to actually ban all of the on-street parking. And Japan has this unusual strategy. In a way, it was accidental, but in the 1950s and 60s, they decided our streets are too narrow. We won't allow more or less any on-street parking. There are just a few on-street parking meters, and you can park for a short time in a street to run an errand in many cases, but there is overnight parking for residents is totally not allowed in Japan. And in the daytime, there's very little parking in the streets. As a result of that, the off-street parking more or less takes care of itself. Japan does have parking norms, but they're very low. I'll talk a bit more about them later. But the off-street parking emerges as more or less a market phenomenon. And most areas, even in the suburbs, have some commercial parking, and people can rent parking near their house if they don't have parking in their house. Unfortunately, it's probably a little bit late to do this in most Indian cities, although there might be areas of Indian cities where you might choose this strategy of completely banning parking on the streets. So in dense cities, we can't really solve our problem by increasing the off-street parking supply. It just doesn't work unless we actually work really hard to improve the on-street parking management. Now, Japan bans on-street parking. Most cities can't do that, but they can improve the on-street parking management. So what does that mean? Well, I like to keep it simple. I see three key goals when it comes to on-street parking. One is design the on-street parking properly, in keeping with the design for any particular street. Each street will have a design that suits the role of that street, and we design the parking, if any, to suit that. And we need to ration parking. In busy parts of our cities, we always need to ration the parking. It's an unfortunate reality. And the best way to do that, again, an unfortunate reality, is pricing. So we price just enough, not too much, but just enough so that we have some vacant spaces. And thirdly, we need to enforce. To back up the good design and the good rationing, we'll need to do some enforcement. So here's some good design, an example from Ahmedabad of a good design. Now, I think maybe CG Road in Ahmedabad has changed since I took this photograph, but nevertheless, this design encouraged good parking behavior. We need enforcement, and I won't go into all of the details, but it is absolutely possible to have good enforcement. It's better by wardens, not the police, and technology is our friend when it comes to enforcement. And this is gradually coming to India. Chennai is going to have pretty good enforcement in the near future, for example. And finally, rationing here. On-street parking needs rationing. Even in cities with terrible public transport, don't be afraid to price the on-street parking. This is Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, a city of 4 million people with only 6 bus routes. So it's got terrible public transport, but they do have some parking pricing in certain areas, and it works very well. How? People are not shifting to public transport, but they are changing the location of where they park. Instead of parking in these prime locations, they park somewhere more appropriate. or at least the all-day parking moves to somewhere more appropriate. That's the key. So pricing really works, even if you have terrible public transport. If you want to do pricing really well, you'll have different prices in different places and maybe even at different times of the day. I won't go into all the details here, but I just wanted to alert you that this is perhaps the best practice when it comes to pricing on-street parking. You also do need to price residential on-street parking if you allow it at all. And there's a few tips on doing that. It's not easy politically, but if you can be persistent and get to the point of doing this properly, the rewards are enormous. And there are some good precedents for this. You can find some examples on the Parking Reform Atlas. Now, parking is never really free. As I said, it actually is very, very costly. But the cost of parking is very often bundled in with the cost of something else. If you have free parking at your home or at your office, it's not really free, but it's bundled with your employment or with your home. So we want to encourage unbundling of parking, have an explicit price for parking. One of those is encouraging workplace parking fees. This sounds maybe unpleasant, and certainly employees who enjoy free parking at the moment will be unhappy to be faced with fees. One way to alleviate that is to give every employee something, a mobility allowance, instead of giving just some of the employees, those who drive, and they would be typically the richer employees, free parking. So we replace one benefit with a different benefit. Governments can lead by example. Singapore, even all civil servants, including teachers, pay market rates for their parking. Seoul does the same thing and encourages workplace parking fees. Residential parking is best with the parking price separate from the cost of housing. So in housing societies, for example, they should be allowed to charge for parking as part of their own internal parking management. That means that the households that don't have a car should not be subsidizing those that do have a car. Singapore does it this way. Even in the public housing in Singapore, you have to buy your parking separately. You have to rent your parking separately. And that's at least $50 a month. And that means that the people who don't own a car are not subsidizing those who do own a car. Now we get to a topic that's a little bit complicated, but let me try to be really clear at why this is beneficial. Park once and walk planning. So parking spaces that we do build should serve the whole area, not just the building that they're in. So for example, in Singapore, the parking norms are not very high. So as a result of that, most parking is managed, it's priced. And that also encourages the people who have parking, who own parking, to open it to the public because they're pricing it. They don't need to keep it only for their tenants. So office buildings, shopping centers, even the public housing, most of the parking is open to the public. So this means that there's no real problem. If one building has its parking full, sometimes, it's not really a problem. You can park in a nearby building or a nearby parking lot and just walk to where you wanted to go. So park once and walk. You park once in the area and then you walk to where you need to go. Unfortunately, the current conventional way that we do parking in most cities is based on parking norms, minimum parking norms, where the city government requires a lot of parking with every building. The mindset is that every building should have its own parking. That promotes the idea that all of this parking should be private and only for customers and tenants and the people who are going to that building. That means if any one building is short of parking, that is a problem for that building. Where do those people then park? It's much better to plan park once and walk districts, as I've described before, and then everything works much more efficiently. And the parking is part of a pool of parking for the whole area. And as a result, actually, because different buildings have different peak times for their parking, you actually need less parking because there's more sharing going on. And people are not afraid of a shortage because there's usually some parking somewhere in the neighborhood, even if one or two buildings have full parking. This is very common in East Asia. So in PRC China and in Taiwan, most parking in the busy neighborhoods is park once and walk district type parking with parking that's open to the public. So office buildings have their parking priced and open to the public. Even residential buildings in Shenzhen in China open their parking to the public. In Japan, this is also very common with even the setbacks in the front of buildings sometimes have coin parking, as you can see here, rather than private parking in front of buildings, as you can see in this undermud shot on the left. So the old thinking was that every building should have its own parking, but the new thinking here is that parking should be open to the public or shared in park once and walk districts. So if we have park once and walk districts and we manage the on-street parking well, we don't have to worry about how much parking there is so much. Governments can refrain from boosting the parking supply. And an increasing number of cities around the world have already done this. Berlin actually has done this since the late 1990s, and we're going to hear more about that shortly. But an increasing number of cities have abolished their parking minimums. That might sound scary, but the result is only gradual as new buildings get built. It's not a sudden shock. And we've seen before, when parking is not plentiful, people start to price it, they start to manage it, and things work okay. There are things you can do if you're not. If you
come to the end, yeah, please.
Yes,
yeah.
I'm almost finished.
Okay.
So if you're not ready to abolish your parking minimums, you can at least do some things to reduce the harm of those parking minimums. So almost the final slide. The old thinking was that if we have a parking problem, we need more parking. The new thinking is if we have a parking problem, we should manage the parking better. That's the first thing to try. We can even use parking to reduce traffic, but I won't talk about that right now. Motorists should not expect parking to be cheap or free of charge or exactly where they live or want to go to, but they can expect a reasonable parking management to give them a good level of service. Here are some sources that you can look at for more information. So that's where I'll stop. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Walter. Now I would like to introduce our next speaker. It's Ms. Roy Chaudhuri. I would like to welcome her very She is the Executive Director of Research and Advocacies at the Center of Science and Environment, and she is the head of the Air Pollution and Clean Transportation Program, Campaigns for Clean Air and Public Health. She has written and published on urban mobility issues with focus on environment and parking management. One example of her research article is on one-time parking charts, a vision or a nightmare for Delhi. She will speak to us about measures to regulate parking demand and improve efficiency of on-street parking management. Dear Ms. Chaudhuri, over to you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's wonderful to be here with everyone and participate in this very important conversation. So let me begin by, so in fact, Paul has answered this beautifully. And, I always like to begin with this question that, should we, keep widening roads, keep providing for more free parking, keep constructing multi-level car parks or not? And clearly the message and signal is so clear from what we have understood that no. And therefore today the whole focus is shifting towards reducing parking demand and supply, eliminate free parking, improve public transport connectivity, accessibility, walking, cycling, and clearly sustainability of the city depends on the choices that we make. So in that context, the question for us is, are cities in a position today in India to implement a strategy like that? And that's the key question that we really want to answer today. And so far, we know that all cities have some kind of parking supply policy in place. But today we are talking about demand management. And clearly what it's telling us all the time is that even though some loose principles have been adopted from time to time, but there is clearly no regulatory framework or is there a clear regulatory framework to enable implementation. That's what we really want to understand, because we want to make the new principles of demand management enforceable. But do we have the right blueprint and template for that? So let's draw some lessons from Delhi, where a lot has happened. It has really been a long drawn battle in Delhi over the last decade. Now, what is very interesting about this battle is that slowly, how since 2005, I'm really going back so far back in time, when the Supreme Court had intervened and said that how are you going to reduce the traffic volume on your roads? And that kind of triggered. And as you can see, that through the Supreme Court process, and then the National Urban Transport Policy 2006, then the Lieutenant Governor policy in Delhi in 2014, TOD policy, and now finally today in Delhi when we are framing the master plan of 2041. All along now you can see increasingly the new principles of demand management, of taking area approach to parking management, prioritizing other users on, while designing for parking, user pay principle. All of these have now been taken on board, and there's a clear policy mandate for everyone. Another interesting development when you're looking at it from regulatory perspective is that currently about 122 cities in India are making their clean air action plans. And what is fascinating that almost all plans are today talking about parking as one of the air pollution mitigation strategies. And that's what we've seen in Delhi first. And therefore in Delhi, the plan, which is actually enforceable under the Environment Protection Act, that really makes it legally binding, that has taken on board, again, all the principles of demand management that we will be discussing. It's talking about reducing pollution and congestion, providing for everyone, all modes of transport, using pricing strategy, using even residential parking permit in residential areas. So all kind of elements are now coming in. So finally, what has really given certain definitiveness to the whole exercise in Delhi is this notification, the rule making that happened very clearly under the Central Motor Vehicle Act rule. So this is the first ever notified rules of parking based on demand management that has come up. And this is also the first ever when it has asked for parking management area plans. There's a critical strategic shift now from the earlier traditional approach of taking only spot fixing approach, that if you have parking problem here, just go and build a multi-level car park. But instead of that, now the rules are saying that no, you really need to take a zonal area-wide view of the entire area to understand the street activity. And based on that, and based on the principle of capping and demand management, you have to come up with a plan of area plan. So this has now been notified, and this is the first ever legislative backup for parking management in Delhi. Now, what is another interesting part is that, as we all know, that this has to and has become translatable in terms of master plan. So initially, the current master plan, which is in place, the MPT 2021, that had already taken on board the concept of area plan or the parking district management plan. But the new draft master plan 2041, which has just been released for comment, that again has taken on board and integrated the provisions of the parking rules in Delhi, which has asked for the PMAP framework, that is the parking management area plan. It is asking for proof of parking, and it has also introduced a very interesting concept. It is saying decide parking supply according to the public transport accessibility index. So therefore, the areas which has got higher score on that index should have less parking. And to that has been added the TOD, the transit-oriented development provisions, for 500-meter radius around metro station, and nearly more than half of Delhi falls within the 500-meter of the total network that we are talking about today. And that is very clearly asked for, that you have to, while enhancing walking, cycling, street improvement, multimodal integration, it is important to provide for less parking, and that 50% of the parking should be public and shared, and also provides for bicycle parking for every 100 meter. And the master plan, which is actually notified under Delhi Development Act, is enforceable again. So I'm constantly harping on the fact of that. And for the national perspective, we know there's a TOD policy at the national level, which should be able to inform policies in other cities of India as well. But devil is in the detail, and each city has to now develop its own strategy. And outside Delhi, I'm flagging off some interesting hill towns who are already talking about, and they have notified, there's a legal notification, and they're enforcing it. That is again the proof of parking, that you cannot buy a car without providing the proof of parking, and that is properly monitored. So what all of these have actually catalyzed in Delhi is this whole approach towards parking management area plan, which implicitly caps parking to some extent. And that's what we really need to understand today. And even though we have we have the rules, and we also have policies today asking for parking as a demand management strategy. But in Delhi, we have found that even then the Supreme Court had to intervene for implementation of the PMAPs. And there was a clear directive from the Supreme Court that you first do 3 pilot projects, and this Lajpat Nagar, Kamla Nagar, and Krishna Nagar. And based on that, you need to roll it out. Now, the 3 pilot projects have happened, and then the Supreme Court directive in August 2020 said that the PMAP will now have to be rolled across entire Delhi. And that process has started, and currently the urban local bodies are developing PMAPs for about 14 areas in Delhi. In addition to that, the multimodal integration plans are also underway in 70 metro stations. Now, that's a huge opportunity for Delhi, and there's a huge learning curve for us. So making of the PMAP, and very clearly the rules and the Delhi master plan that they're talking about, that the PMAPs will have to be delineated, of course, along with consultation with all the different departments and agencies and the residential welfare association. And the PMAP strategy will have to define everything for that area. The parking management strategy, parking charges, ITS application for parking facility management, and enforcement plan. And for that, proper inventory and surveys, which are already happening for those 14 areas, where they'll have to do the survey and find out accumulation of parking demand, public and institutional parking facilities that can be made available for shared parking, street usage pattern, vending zone, MMI facilities, pedestrian, NMT circulation plans. So which essentially means that PMAP is just not about parking, but parking management can be successful if you can take into account entire and complete street management and area management. And that's what we are looking at, and plus TOD aspect is very critical. In that PMAP, and that is very interesting, certain no-go areas have been very clearly defined, that you cannot find parking on footpath in green areas, you have to provide emergency lane, you have to stay away from the traffic intersections, and after that, if whatever space is available, you have to manage that well, and you have to demarcate that well. And in that, as I said, the complete street management approach is needed, where you will have to provide for everyone, parking, and yes, for the other road users. So, but the most critical flashpoint is the parking management in residential areas, which all cities are finding very tough to handle. And here, what the rules are saying and the way PMAPs are being done is that you have to, those mandatory conditions of the rules will have to be implemented, as I've just outlined. But in addition to that, the MPD draft 2041 is also saying that you have to minimize parking on the residential streets, and the local bodies will have to provide for parking lease, the parking permit in the residential areas, enforce proof of parking, and as I said earlier, that the parking provisions will also have to be linked to the accessibility and the public transport service availability. So this is how now the PMAPs have begun to look like for different areas in Delhi. We'll not go into detail, but just it's good to see that you're not just talking about a spot in a commercial area, but the entire neighborhood has been taken and delineated. And in the map, you can see where you can park, where you cannot park. And that has unleashed another opportunity where the local residents are now involved and where they're counting houses, counting cars. Then after applying the rules in the PMAP, they can find out how many cars can be accommodated, and those that cannot be accommodated, then they're finding whether that can find a space in a neighboring area and in a shared facility. Now, it's an amazing ground level work that has started now involving even local people, and that helps us to give a lot of local grassroots solution. And this is the transformation that we are beginning to see, as you can see here, before and after. And this is all about demarcation and demarcation and demarcation. The other side of this is that this has also challenged the PMAP approach, that you cannot have multi-level car parks in isolation. Even the MLC pieces will have to be integrated in the PMAP. Now you can see the disconnect here, which Paul had also shown, the mismanagement of the available parking facilities. On the dashboard, you can see the number of parking slots that are available inside the parking facility, more than 200, 400. And yet outside you have illegal parking and your surface parking is absolutely full. Now clearly this integrated management is not happening there. And additionally today the MPD 2041 is saying that you have to use this for park and ride, park and walk strategy. And also you will also need to use this for and there's another provision they're trying to bring in, that you have to restrict on-street parking within 500 meters of MLCPs. Now we'll have to see how that works. So people are, now the other part of this whole PMAP is that they are looking at the pricing, and there's a formula given, not getting into the details of this, but there's a huge resistance to it. In the initial rules that were developed for Delhi, that the specific provisions on residential parking pricing was withheld, but there is still some provision. But what is interesting, when you're doing the ground survey, you end up seeing that even in multi-level car parks today, that the residents are paying for their nighttime parking. And they're paying the usual commercial rates for that. And also in the different apartment blocks, you now know that the resident welfare associations today, they themselves have come up with their pricing strategy where they are charging high and higher for the first car, second car, and the third car. And even if people don't own a car, even if they have a junk car, for that they have to pay. And those who do not have cars, they can rent out their space. So this is a very well-defined strategy evolving in a self-governing process. But government is not taking that on board, and we are allowing free parking on public space. And the final few 2 points, that today the parking norms, and there's so much concept of the idea about, and that we all want the parking maximum to happen, but we know that we really haven't reached to that stage when we are defining the parking norms. But the PMAP implicitly assumes capping. But what is more important, we just want to raise this awareness that if people are demanding more and more norms and more higher provisions of parking within built area, then the mistake that they're going to make, because MPT is saying you have to provide for the entire parking in the new development inside the property. But if you ask for more norms, imagine how much of the precious, valuable property you're going to give away only to park cars, from where you could have otherwise earned your rental, or you could have had extra rooms. So these are issues that are coming up, and so these are the transformation that we're talking about. So already in Delhi, in Ajmal Khan, in Karol Bagh, how the parking has been removed to create car-free streets. These are the zero-emission streets of Delhi today. Chandni Chowk, the heritage part of Delhi, where the similar transformation has happened, and the parking strategy is central to this. And then, as I said, and we will hear from Bhubaneswar as well, that how other street management for other road users cannot happen without a parking policy. So here is an investment that has happened for parking, for walking and cycling, but because we do not have a parking strategy, so that road space is being encroached and being taken away. And the final point is that today India is adopting a transit-oriented development policy, but we are finding in Delhi that when we are doing urban renewal and redevelopment, we are not adhering to the principles of TOD which have been laid out. But we know from other cities like Kolkata, etc., where they are doing that kind of design. In Delhi, despite being in a TOD zone, the Kidwai Nagar got developed as a gated colony with abundant parking. But in other parts, as you can see, that they're developing theory building typology with active frontage, with controls on parking, so forth. And that's the kind of transformation we need to see. But the change that we want to see requires public support. And when we are asking for higher charges, it is important to inform and tell people that how the part of that revenue will be used for local area improvement, and therefore you elicit, and that's how it is happening globally, to be able to build that kind of a thing. So finally, what we are saying here is that PMAP has to be the basis of implementation and enforcement, so that you can take an integrated view of the area and do the complete management. You cap parking supply, and you price it, regulate it, and create public spaces, maximize asset usage through shared public parking approach, do good IT management of the facility, and do good local area development. And that's the way you will see that everyone is going to benefit. And that's the communication strategy that you need to build around it, so that people understand that not only the car users will benefit from it, even the non-car users. And this will unleash series of individual decisions not to use the car as much as they want. And they can therefore do carpool, they can reduce their trip numbers, they can reduce, they can shift to other modes. And that's the way we really want to see the transformation happening. And with that, therefore, what you really need here finally is the whole strategy of, how you need to therefore use the PMAP as the basis of regulation and enforcement to be able to guide action in cities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anumita. Thank you very much. Before I introduce our third speaker, I would like to encourage our participants to post their questions in our chat, please. So at the end, we have time for answering them. So then I would like to welcome our third speaker, Mr. Lorenz Kubert. He is head of the Public Order Department of the District of Berlin-Mitte, located in the city center. He oversees the largest current parking management area in Germany. Currently, the Public Order Department of Berlin is in charge of managing around 40,000 public parking spaces in the historic city center of the German capital. And in the last couple of years, Mr. Kubert has doubled the parking zone areas in this district and revised parking fees as well. He currently focuses on the digital transformation of the parking management system. He will speak about parking management in the city center of Berlin. Dear Mr. Kubert, over to you.
Thank you very much. Also a warm and hearty welcome from Berlin. I would like to give you my insights on parking management. I have been the head of the local public authority that has been managing the parking management in this historic city center for the last 5 years. And I just wanted to start with a short history then on how we do it currently, how we realize the parking management system and what is our daily business, and then how we review actually the parking management system that we have set up, because it's a constant process. And then I have some final ideas and some thoughts for this webinar. So parking management in Berlin, but also in the Western world, Germany especially, is quite easily explained. After World War II, most of the cities were heavily destroyed, and the cities were rebuilt, and they were rebuilt in a very car-friendly way, meaning houses were torn down, streets were really wide made, and the car itself has been seen as a symbol of progress. So everything had to be made car-friendly. And you also can see this by the numbers of cars. I showed you the numbers of cars is rising steadily. Also, there is a relation, of course, to the economic development at these times. And with this, in the 70s, the first 60s and 70s, the first parking problem arises, mostly in the dense city center areas. And this has led to the fact that Berlin West at this time started to put a first price tag on the use of public parking space. And there the idea is to restrict the time that someone spends with his car on the public space. And it was actually easily done. They installed parking meters. Each parking slot got a parking meter. You just were able to put coins in, and yeah, it was controlled actually by the state police at this time, and women got actually hired. It was the first time ever that women were allowed to have a real police job, and it was actually limited to a few major streets. Then we are talking about the second round, which is after the fall of the Iron Curtain, because again, there was a high demand for new cars. The car again has been seen as a symbol of prosperity, but also liberty. The Iron Curtain was down, especially East Germans and also Eastern Europeans were now capable of like discovering the Western European parts. And thus the car was a huge yeah, status symbol. And this, of course, the parking problems were increasing, which actually forced Berlin in 1994 to introducing the first parking zones. So not only that now only a limited, some limited streets had a price tag on it, but now we had like completely zones, also residential areas. And for this, they were using parking ticket machines, also coins only, very low tariffs, low fines, and in order to make it more appealing for the residents, all the residents that are living in one certain zone, as you can see on the picture, those are the zones, they got a free permit. They just have to pay a very low yeah, working fee for this. And the control again of those zones was in the hand of the state police. And as you can imagine, the state police itself has more important things to do than just controlling if someone has paid his parking fee or not. So we entered a third round. This was with the new millennia. The urbanization and the was progressing, and the numbers of cars, as you can see, is still rising in Germany. There was a short stop after in the late 80s, but it was rising again. And now also the question of the environmental issues in the city gain more and more important. There was legislation by the European Union demanding a better environment, especially a better air in big cities like Berlin. And ever since this time, since 2004, Berlin has continuously introduced new parking zones. And the entire idea is that Berlin itself has an inner circle that becomes a low emission zone, and that it will be a completely, the entire city center will be a parking zone itself. This time the control was handed over to a newly founded local public order authority, because the idea was there to really enforce the parking management. Also, the diversification of payment methods was offered. So now you can also pay by credit cards, but thanks to the cell phone, you can also pay by cell phone. There are, at the same time, other forms of transportations were improved, like the public transportation, the underground runs throughout the night by now, in order to make it more appealing. Side bicycle lanes were also set up and improved. And of course, the tariffs were risen, and fines were also put a bit higher. And now we are undergoing the preparations for a scan car, meaning to make the checking of the parking fees in a more digital way. If you, just the things, how we do it, if you want to do parking management, of course, first of all, at least in Germany, you have to find a legal basis, because introducing parking management, introducing fines, introducing fees, you need a legal reason for this, because you're restricting the freedom and the rights of individuals, in this case, car drivers. But of course, when you come up with a legal basis for this, and you have the support of the politicians, then as the public authority, you can get started. And the best way to do it, to perform a stakeholder analysis, and then to plan your public relations, your timeline, and your resources. And once you have parking management introduced, you have, of course, the daily business, like starting with low tariffs, show a goodwill at the beginning. Like at the beginning, when we ever start a new zone, we don't hand out fines right away. but we remind people to pay, and we give them like 2-3 months to adjust to this new situation. Of course, in advance, we have informed them, we have offered town hall meetings, webinars, we have informed them over the newspapers, every means possible. And then it's of course time to check your parking machines, parking ticket machines, that they are working, and you have to adapt to new circumstances, e.g. long-term construction sites, because the street itself, it is public space, and it is undergoing constantly change. Currently now with the yeah, that's why you have to review it. So like in 2018, Mitte itself, the city center, we actually had reviewed our parking zones by an independent expert to see if the parking management as we had planned it and laid out in the years before was actually working. And the report showed that the parking management is an effective tool. It can really reduce the long-term use of public parking space and foster the usage of alternative forms of transportation. But let me remind you, still, parking management itself is not a cure for all, but it is an important piece to make cities more habitable. So like Paul already said, you have to integrate it into a whole system. Like in Berlin, we came up with the mobility law, focusing on pedestrians, focusing on cars as well, focusing on cyclists, focusing on the public transportation system. As I mentioned, the public transportation was improved. Also, it is now running throughout the night. Whenever we do the parking fees, when we come to this issue, we do not give easily out exemptions. Like we have car sharing. Car sharing is a very important new method of transportation, but at the same time, a car is a car, and it also a car sharing car takes away space. So we also ask the car sharing companies to pay parking fees when they put their cars on streets with the parking, where there is parking management. We came up now during the Corona crisis, we came up, or the COVID-19 crisis, we came up with parking, let me show this to you quickly, with pop-up cycling ways, so that part of, in order to improve the usage of, cycling space, we also used parking space now for the restaurants, so that more people can sit outside, enjoy the fresh air, and yeah, of course, we can use parking space for this as well. Or in Berlin, we even shut down one of the major city shopping streets, and we just transformed it into an area where people can like to sit and rest, and where you can pass by as a cyclist. So you have to do it as a modal thing. You have to do it in a one thing. And if ever, this is my final advice, if ever you want to introduce parking management, just do it right from the beginning in a completely digital parking management way, like they have done so far in the Netherlands and Scandinavia and in Spain. I'm really sorry, Germany is really far behind with this, not because of the technology, but because of our data protection laws, which are very strict, because in Germany, the license plate itself is considered a personal data, and thus we cannot just scan it. However, we are finding some ways around it. So in the next 5 years, you will also see a scan car. So instead of sending out people checking every car if their parking fee has been paid, a scan car will go through the street, take a photo of every license plate, scan it, and check it with the database if this person has paid the parking fee, or if it's like a car of a resident that is allowed to stay there. And when once you have introduced all those digital tools, you can also do app payments. You can have online application tools. You can introduce bonus free minutes in order to have to create incentives for people maybe to put their cars on certain streets and not on major streets. And of course, you can forward automatically the fines. And if ever you want to still use a parking meter, then try to set it up as an integrated urban furniture piece that offers additional services, because also a parking meter uses public space, so it should do something more than just handing out parking tickets. So like free Wi-Fi, a sales point for museums tickets, etc. With those things, I keep it short because I would like to start with you the discussion later on. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very nice day. See you later.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kumar, and also for your advice. It's not only parking, it's also about street furniture. Yeah, sometimes we miss this point. So now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Srimanta Mishra, Deputy Commissioner for Revenue and Special Projects of Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation, BMC. He is from the Disha Administrative Service and played a crucial role in the smart city planning of Bhubaneswar, which was ranked #1 in the 100 smart cities of Government of India. Bhubaneswar is one of the smart SUT partner cities. Our partners decided to prepare a low carbon mobility plan for the further development of the city, and BMC recognized very early the importance of parking management as a key to individual traffic and parking demand management. In parallel with the low carbon mobility plan, a parking policy and parking management initiatives were taken up. Concepts and reports are all in final phase, so we are not able to share this today in our post, but we will do that later. So dear Mr. Mishra, I invite you to present the parking initiatives in Bhubaneswar. Over to you. You are not audible?
Am I audible?
Yeah, now you are audible. Thank you.
No?
Yeah, yes.
Oh.
You are
Okay.
audible.
Thank you. Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank GIZ in helping us in preparation of parking area management plan and draft parking policy. So I would like to introduce, give an introduction of Bhubaneswar city. Next slide. Next. No. Yapurvada. So Bhubaneswar is the capital city of the state of Odisha, having a population of around 12 lakhs, not much of a big city, and the 21% of the area is under road network, with the private network, public transport network of 22 routes, of consisting of around 150 kilometers and 252 stops. Next. देखा जाऊंगी ठीक है okay. And the need was felt for parking area management plan in Bhubaneswar city, for which GIZ is assisting us, and the registered vehicle are increasing at a compound annual growth rate of 16%. For a period of 4 years, with vehicle ownership growing at 12%. And average speed have reduced from 28 km to 26 km. And footpaths and roads enclosed by parked vehicles and vendors, resulting in congestion. So on-street parking in Bhubaneswar is consisting of nearly 85 to 90% of the total parking. And the parking demand management is required at a push factor to support the efforts to promote public transport and non-motorized transport in the city. So the visionary mobility document, that is low carbon mobility plan and parking policy prepared for Bhubaneswar, recommends developing parking area management plan for priority road network of 40 kilometers. In fact, in this city, we have two priority corridors. One is from 0 to 40 kilometers, and another one is 41 to 80 kilometers. So first we have taken the priority road network 1. And LCMP is a key sector to streamline mobility. The slide shows the long-term and strategic and vision document until 2040 to turn Bhubaneswar to a livable, climate-friendly and transit-oriented city. So the next. So the Bhubaneswar Parking Area Management Plan is a local plan prepared by the city authority to manage parking demand in an area and used as a tool to discourage private vehicle ownership and promote the shift towards sustainable modes like public transport, walking and cycling. This slide shows the comprehensive development of Bhubaneswar, including the draft parking policy and the low carbon mobility plan Bhubaneswar. This in this plan, we must have on-street and off-street parking areas, including multi-level parking, tried parking, pricing strategy, and non-motorized circulation plan. And we have adopted the implementation strategy to delineating the stakeholders' roles and responsibilities, regulations and enforcement, financing, and management and monitoring in ITS. The next the stakeholders, major stakeholders. ये कहाँ है? बैग दो
एक स्लाइड आगे दो और आगे
So the parking area management toolkit is the first step towards preparing the management plan. So this slide shows the toolkit, the step-by-step guidance to prepare the parking area management plan, like when to start planning for PMP, how to delineate area, what data sources are required, how to analyze the parking issues in the area, and the formulation of parking area management plan includes deciding on priority for road users, parking and no parking area, pedestrian and non-motorized network improvement, site parking management, signage and wayfinding, contract management, enforcement, monitoring and evaluation. Next. So while preparing the parking area management plan, the guiding principles were in line with the low carbon mobility plan and parking policy objectives, that is to promote sustainable modes and encourage shift towards sustainable modes and reducing the demand for parking. So we have delineated the general priority for street space, which are in the slide. Next. So first of all, we have taken the priority road network, under priority road network, the master canteen parking area management plan as per toolkit. The parking issues in the area was requirement of loading and unloading bays, spillover in adjoining areas, regulation enforcement to be strengthened. And in other road patches, the main issues were short-term parking demand is higher, again the spillover in adjoining areas and footpaths, regulation enforcement to be strengthened. In another patch, it was found that underutilized parking area near the market, need for designing off-street parking area in the vicinity, strengthening of regulation enforcement required. In another patch, we found spillover of parking on main road, requirement of wayfinding and signages for information to service users, and strengthening of enforcement were required. This slide, the strategy for master canteen area. That is to limit, restrict, reduce parking supply. Ideally, no private motorized parking to be provided along the mass transit corridors, and restricted short-term parking only along the corridor. Improve the road cross section by focusing on transit infrastructure. Focus on signage, wayfinding and neighborhood parking maps. Information to be available on the transit stop. Provision of IPT and NMT parking close to transit stop. Demarcating parking clearly with a distinct color. Focus on demand responsive pricing. Introduction and upgradation of technology. Parking fee collection. Monitoring of parking regulation. Then the next slide is the PMP for master canteen area, where no parking within 50 meters from major junction, no parking within 50 meters from bus stop, no parking within 200 meters from multi-level car parking, no parking within 200 meters from multimodal transport hub, no parking on Sachibale Road and Rajpath Road, no parking on road width, pay and park with higher charges on transit corridor and road with ROW of less than 15 meters. Similarly, this slide,
cycle tracking, public bicycle sharing.
तो बैक में था ना, उसके बैक में था.
इसके बाद
हाँ. This slide shows this parking area management plan. No parking and one or both side parking. Next, cycle track. Then non-motorized transport facilities, that is cycle track and public bicycle sharing stands. So cycle track on major road needs to be segregated to reduce conflict with other vehicles. New cycle track with lane marking. Total cycle track 18.6 km. Proposed bicycle stand 26 stand near transit stops and activity areas such as school, college, market area, mela ground and major commercial areas. This is the proposed IPT stop. IPT stands are proposed at after 50 meter at each transit stop location. Taxi pickup drop-off is proposed near market area entry. Total 13 IPT stops are proposed in area. Total ECS equivalent car space is 92. And wayfinding boards to be available at each location. This slide shows that parking along market areas. Our plan, no parking in the transit corridor. IPT, that is auto rickshaw stops near market area and near existing bus stop. IPT and taxi pickup drop-off locations. No parking for taxi cabs to prevent congestion on road. High parking rates at allocated freight parking slot during day and low parking rates during night. Dedicated area for freight vehicle parking and unloading activities. Next. This is the Janpat mark from Rajmal Square to Master Canteen Square cross section. We have shown moderate and parallel parking at Janpat mark. Auto stops for near bus stand. This slide shows the layout of parking for Divyang. Divyang means
Handicap, person with disability.
Other differently abled people. Next. This is the pricing strategy. That is to identify high intensity area, differential in the parking rates, higher parking rates for commercial area, and parking fare collection through digital technology. So we are identifying area as premium area in the parking area management plan. These are based on the location due to the intensity of the activity. The differential in the parking rates in the area for on-street and off-street parking based on land value. This can be in line with the norms suggested in the parking policy. If the number of commercial buildings in the PMP area are more than 60%, parking charges will be higher than the rest of the areas in line with the parking policy directive. In addition, it is also proposed to include educational areas like colleges, universities, tuition classes, and industrial areas such as info park, where the offices are concentrated. Parking fare collection, that we propose digital technology based solution to be preferred. Attendant and digital handheld, electronic single space or two space meter, smart multi-space with pay by plate, pay by smartphone app, in-vehicle meters, global position GPS based on vehicle meters. This is the proposed institutional setup to manage the parking in Bhubaneswar. We have the Bhubaneswar Development Authority planning cell in BMC, the Bhubaneswar Development Authority and the Municipal Corporation planning cell will oversee the process of planning for parking area management plan. That is designating the areas and coordinating the preparation of plans for the area, improvement in the road network, and planning for non-motorized facilities in the area. And implementation will be by the parking cell in BMC, involved with the implementation of parking area management plan, tendering and contracting out the area, coordinating with the transport department, road department to improve the network and provision of non-motorized facilities, providing parking wardens at each location, 2 people per location. And the enforcement will be handled by traffic police and private agencies. That is to ensure enforcement of parking areas, collection of penalties on parking violations, designating no parking areas, freight and heavy vehicles entry restrictions in the city. And monitoring will be parking cell facilitated by the Bhubaneswar Smart City Limited, which we call BSCL. That is monitoring and performance and help in developing ITS specifications for the contracts and ITS technology integration. This is monitoring, and the informal assessment can be conducted every 1 to 2 years. Like interview business and property owners and get their reaction and feeling. Do they still support the original solution? Analyze the revenue generated from fees and fines and assess the effectiveness of the system. Assess the effectiveness of the marketing and promotional program. And these are some enforcement and financial effectiveness of the parking signages.
We need slowly come to an end, so maybe, yeah. But I think you don't have many slides left, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, ma'am, we are concluding in a minute.
Yeah. Okay.
The formation of city parking management committee. So, as recommended by the Bhubaneswar draft parking policy, the Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation has already formed the CPMC, City Parking Management Committee, with the objective to monitor and ensure the implementation of parking policy. The Commissioner BMC will be the chairperson, and other stakeholders are from the academic officials from police, traffic, and transport department, Bhubaneswar Smart City Limited, BDA, cab aggregators, NGOs working for women and child safety. This is BMC's initiative step towards management of parking lots in BMC area. I have already said that city parking management committee has been formed. The engagement of private party for management of parking lots, engagement of transgender group also for management of few parking lots, creation of provision for parking of bicycle in every parking lot, and there will be pricing to discourage the parking for longer period, 40% discount for e-vehicles under all categories, designated parking space for persons with disability, application of POS machine and ticketing machine, stipulation of citizen-centric guidance for management of parking lots. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Misha, for this overview, what you have initiated so far. So then I would like to ask our Professor Swami to come back to us as well. I think we have, so we collected questions in the chat, but I think Professor Swami would like to introduce some core questions at first, right?
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the presenters for a wonderful, enlightening presentations on this difficult issue of parking management. Before we take up questions, I would like to, our colleagues have designed a small poll, and first I think let's just take that poll and see what our perceptions are about parking. Nitika, would you organize this, please? Firak?
Yes, sir.
Yes, please launch the poll.
Yeah.
Yes, the first question is parking provision a primary responsibility of the government or of that of private entities? Answers to this question are local government, private entities or businesses, or both. Who is responsible? I think that's the question. You need to select any one of them. Yes. Firak, is that done? Can you share the results?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Okay. 70% of the people think both the government and the private entities have to deal with it, but then 23% think that it is the business of local government, and very few think that it is the private entity's business. I think that's interesting. Yeah? Now let's go to the second question of the poll. What, according to you, is the most effective way to address parking issues in Indian cities? Please select all those responses which apply. Increasing supply of parking spaces, that is multi-story parking lots, reducing parking supply, pricing parking, improving public transport and changing people's behavior, introducing parking permits. Choose those which you think are solutions to manage parking in Indian cities. Firak?
Yes, sir. I just shared.
Yes. Improving public transport, making efforts to change people's behavior tops the list, 88%. Pricing of parking is 64%. And parking permits. I think the presentations, the 4 presentations appears to be effective in communicating what is right. Answer seems to be in the right direction. Yeah. Let's go to the next question. Yes. As a citizen, do you support the initiative of proof of parking for purchase of vehicle? Please select any one of the answers below. You will support? Yes. You would not like to support? No. Maybe or maybe not. All right, 83% supporting and 13% are not sure, and only 4% who says no. I think that's very encouraging kind of a response. Yeah. With this, now let's move on to a brief discussion, questions and answers. We have received some interesting questions. Let's see how much time we have. Depending on that, we'll try and cover as many as what we have received. Yeah. Ramit? Firak, will you please present the question?
Can you please make me a presenter, Firak?
Firak, make Ramit the presenter.
Sure, sir.
Question, please. Yeah, the first question is by Sumanta Ghosh. How the best practices of 500 to 700 cars per 1,000 people is comparable to 70 cars per 1,000 people, like a situation in India. It's essentially how is West comparable to India when with regard to vehicle ownership and the parking management. May I request Paul to take up this question?
Okay, yes. So I guess the intention behind the question is skepticism about whether the experiences of somewhere like Berlin or Japan or the United States are relevant to India. And that actually motivated me when I was looking into parking initially. My first investigations on parking were to ask the question, exactly, is Western or rich country parking discussion relevant to Asian cities? It wasn't just the low income or low motorization cities, it was also just even places like Japan. You know, is American or European parking policy relevant to Japan or Singapore? And what I found was that, broadly speaking, yes, in the sense that the principles are the same. You know, people are people, people respond to incentives. If you have free parking in the street and priced parking off street in the multi-story car parks, Americans, Germans, Japanese, Indians, Bangladeshis, they all respond in the same way. I would respond the same way too. You know, I would park in the street.
Yep.
But the institutional context and the details do differ from place to place. So yes, which is why when I give presentations about parking, I try to focus on the principles, because I'm trying to talk to many different countries and the details will be different. That is certainly true. But those principles that I tried to share, I hope they would be applicable with some adjustment for local conditions in a very wide range of contexts. One thing that is even more powerfully true in a place with low car ownership than in a place with high car ownership is that pricing parking is extremely just and extremely fair in a place like India, whereas in a place like, say, Los Angeles, where a very large percentage of households, even poor households, have cars, you might worry if we price parking. Some people worry that that's not fair, whereas and that it might burden low-income people. So you have to be a little more careful in that context. Whereas in India, we know only people who are relatively wealthy have cars. Then we've got a large group of people in the middle who have motorcycles. And then a lot of people have no vehicle at all. So pricing car parking, at least, we know is not going to be burdening poor people in India. So there are differences, of course, but they often go in the direction of it's even more important to manage parking in a place like India.
Thank you. Thank you. Very well said. I think sustainable mobility principles, wherever you apply, are going to be similar and they will remain applicable. But then how you apply them to a context is very critical. And then you are saying countries like ours, even these principles are going to be even more expected to yield better results if we apply them seriously. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Yeah. Now, let's go to the next question on the board. This is Prasad Shekhar, specifically asking about Berlin. Did Berlin authorities face any objection for paying parking fees from the citizens? May I request Lawrence Kumar to respond?
I really like this question because it's my daily business actually to convince people that parking management itself is a good thing. You have to put it in the time frame. At the beginning of the 90s, people were very much against parking fees, because they were seen it as a restriction. Why? Because they wanted to enjoy their liberties, they wanted to enjoy their cars. However, as the car numbers was rising once again, it was actually more and more the residents that were demanding from the local government and from the city government that parking restriction measurements should be taken, and thus the parking management system was then also taken up by the politicians. And we had in some areas even a referendum against and another referendum for the parking management. But in general, today's view, especially with regards to life quality in the city, is that the residents, and those are the ones who vote actually for the local government, are in favor of parking management. But also keep in mind, in Berlin, like in Berlin city center where I work, only less than 21% of the residents actually still own a car. Meaning that you have actually not many people who own a car anymore, but who rely completely on public transportation or bicycles. And when you then look at the city center, how crowded it is with cars during daytime, you can see that those are the commuters, and the residents and the commuters are two different kinds of people. So the residents are usually in favor because, as I told you at the beginning, they don't have to pay much for their residence permit. And the commuters are against it because they do not want to change their daily routine and use a train, for instance, to come to the work. So for the moment, people are in favor. However, the city government is planning actually to follow the lead of Amsterdam, where the residents also have to pay a very high fee for a residence permit. Here it will be allowed up to 200 euros, which is a lot. Currently, they pay less than 10 euros per year. Then we will see what happens. But in general, citizens are for the moment in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we move to the third question. Okay. There are a set of questions. They are all related, and therefore we have clapped them together. Krishna Sir is asking about parking issues. He thinks that it will not go away by writing no parking zone, even though parking is done in no parking zone, footpath, etc. In most cases, no one is to penalize them. I think it's the second is follow-up question. please cover about the effective illegal parking enforcement measures. That is one of the major issues in India. Okay. Another question which Manoj Kumar asked, the experience in his city, the multi-level parking is not working. What could be taken into consideration while planning and designing the multi-level parking so that it could work? Okay, I invite Anumita to respond to these questions. Anumita.
Thank you, Vana. So clearly the two questions are the first two questions are related to the enforcement challenges. And the second one, of course, this the failure of very myopic, narrow approach of just doing multi-level parking. Now, as far as enforcement is concerned, the simple answer to this is that you can enforce if you know what you are enforcing. In our cities, we don't know what we are enforcing. Enforcement means, and I see this struggle, the city is struggling today when they are doing their quarterly progress report for Clean Air Action Plan, where they have to respond to this indicator, how much they have penalized for illegal parking. Now, yes, they do come up with some challan numbers. Now the question is, what is illegal and what is legal if you have not even defined that area-wide, city-wide? Then it has no meaning. And so that's the reason why which Bhubaneswar is doing what Delhi is doing in terms of developing parking area management plans. So that's the first thing you require. Because we have seen that in Delhi, there is a provision today that during high pollution days, the parking charges can double, triple. But you can enforce that only in the designated parking areas around the commercial areas. Now, suppose if I just go behind that and park, then no one can catch me because it's unregulated and it has not been designated as legal or illegal. Second thing is, and that's a bigger question, even when you have laws, and I know that under central vehicle rules, you cannot park on footpaths, even today, there is a law against that. But somehow, here the enforcement agencies, they become discretionary into whether they want to enforce it or whether they don't want to enforce. So what is stopping the police today from enforcing that particular clause? So clearly, therefore, certain accountability in the system, but for most important, the standard operating procedure, the MIS system for enforcement, all of that will have to be worked out as part of the parking area management plan. And the answer to the last question, as I had already explained in my presentation, that the reason today we are talking about area-wide plan is essentially to say, don't take this spot fixing approach where you just see some parking accumulation, some parking crowding happening, and you think that just providing a multi-level parking there is going to fix the problem. It's not working, it has not worked anywhere. So therefore, the integrated management that we are talking about today, and to design parking area management plans with all these indicators about what you can do, what you cannot do, that implicitly works as a method of capping parking supply in the area and then regulating and managing it well in an integrated way where you are using all off-site parking facilities, including multi-level parking as a shared public facility for everyone to use, including the residents to use that. And then around that, you build your enforcement mechanism. I think that's what is now needed in our cities.
Thank you. Thank you, Anumita.
Could I possibly say two quick things about enforcement?
Yes.
So just very quickly on enforcement, one key thing is usually it's better if it's not the ordinary police who do the enforcement. It's usually better to have a special force of wardens to do enforcement. If under the law it has to be the police, then ask the police to create a force of wardens under them. The fully trained police shouldn't be wasting their time on parking for enforcement. We want people who are focused on parking management, not on police stuff. That's one. The second thing is a place like India each state in India needs to improve the vehicle registry so that we can trust that if we find a vehicle parked illegally, if we send a violation notice to the address according to the license plate, we should know that that really is the address. Whereas I don't think you're confident of that yet in India, so we should be working towards having that system in place. Otherwise, the only thing you can really do is immobilize or tow, and that's a bit too drastic for most parking violations. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Paul, for that supplement. Now, let's move to the fourth question on the list. This is from Nimisha Pal. Has any assessment been made on investment needs and implications and revenues generated by new parking plan implementation? This is to Mr. Shimanta. Mishra-san?
Yes. Yes. That will be done under the detailed planning process that is happening under parking management plan for 40 kilometers.
All right. All right. It's a work in progress. That's right. Thank you.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah, please.
Exactly. When we're talking about revenues, because something that we didn't have in the discussion so far, what we're doing in Berlin is when we, you can see a parking ticket machine in the background. So all the money that is collected there actually just does not go to the city government directly, but it goes to a single pot that is under the supervision of the public local authority. And with this revenue, we actually pay for new parking ticket machines. We pay our people who are actually checking, which, like Paul pointed out, are not fully dressed policemen, but local authority guys. We pay them, and I can assure you it is a very lucrative business, if you would put it in this way. We have like only the city center itself, we have 10 million euros surplus every year, which we of course use, we channel this money then back to the city of Berlin so that they can then improve like environmental policy issues that they have, like setting up new bicycle lanes and stuff like this. So what I want to come up with this is that I'm convinced that parking management itself is a very interesting investment, and that governments should not be afraid of it handling on their own, because otherwise business will do it, but then you will lose the money that you can use as a state or as a public government to make use of it for the environmental issues. Thank you.
Oh, that's good to know. And what you're saying is you can make mobility better and at the same time also make some money for other environmental initiatives. That's an interesting comment. Thank you. Now let's go to the next question. This is by Mr. Partha Pratimnath, is an independent consultant in urban development field. The latest initiatives in Delhi are really heartening. However, I feel that till the time we adopt concrete policy at national level towards reducing car production and ownership, we'll only be creating a problem first by producing more and more cars, increasing car ownership, and then trying to solve it through parking management plans at city level. Wanted your views, updates, whether there is a thinking at a national level in this regard. Maybe it's a question we should keep it open, starting with Paul, and then we'll go to Laurent, and then come to Anumita, conclude with Shimanta. I think that's probably an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, Paul?
Okay, I don't want to comment on national policy towards car ownership in India, but I broadly agree with the sentiment, and I certainly agree that the efforts in Delhi look very promising. I just would very briefly want to make a comment about Japan's proof of parking policy, which came up at the end, and I didn't include it in my presentation, but I could have done. I've written a bit about it on my website. In Japan, the proof of parking policy goes closely together with the overnight ban on on-street parking. And one worry that some countries have tried proof of parking policies, such as parts of Korea and parts of Vietnam. Unfortunately, they found what happened was that it ended up making some of the police corrupt. The people who had to enforce the proof of parking policy just accepted bribes and gave fake proof of parking certificates. But in Japan, you can't do that because you're not allowed to park in the street anyway. if you park in the street with a fake proof of parking certificate, then you'll get towed away anyway, so there's no point. So if you want to have proof of parking in order to sort of make sure that car ownership doesn't overwhelm your roads and your parking, you would need to twin it with a very, very strong and effective parking permit system, so that there's no point getting a fake proof of parking certificate, because some other agency, which is, unless somebody is going to bribe two agencies, they could do that, I guess. But you would be better off having a strong on-street parking permit or bans to go with your proof of parking policy. It's a slightly more tricky policy than people think.
All right. Yep. Thank you. Vansh?
With regards, I like this question as much, very much. There's a thinking on the national level. Well, I personally am convinced that, of course, you need on the national level a general law that allows you to do parking management, but the handling itself, it is better off in the local as well as in the city hands, because in the local hands, you are closer to the people, you are closer to your needs, and you know better your streets and what you can do on those streets and what not. So I think that also like the handling itself is done on better with the local, because local politicians get voted in by those local voters, and there is something they can do for them, and this is something that you can do in one legislative term. Actually, introducing parking management does not require centuries. You can do it actually in less than 3 months if you have all the support of it. So I would say only at the national level to have the general the general law, but then do it on the local level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anumita, I think that's...
Yeah, so clearly this requires more of a bottom-up approach, because I don't think in India or in most countries it is very tough to have a national law that puts a cap on car production. I don't think that really happens. What you really are talking about here, at city level, how do we work with strategies that is first going to control the usage of the car? And that's where your all these restrictions and the demand management measures become so important. Yes, there are countries like China where they are actually restricting the number of cars that you can sell in a city per year. Yes, that has been possible in that kind of a political framework. But in India, it is going to be tough to restrict the car sales. But we can work with a combination of strategy. One, where we have talked about how parking can be an instrument, where proof of parking and restricting parking availability, maximum parking, plus low emission zones, plus other restrictive strategies for car usage. All of that will have to be worked in combination so that demand for car itself can be curtailed. And that's the way forward. And for that, you can create a national guidance, national policy mandate, and wherever possible, a regulatory mandate.
Thank you, Anumita. I think Partha Pratim also seems to have in his mind limiting the overall car production at the national level itself, and he needs to also maybe where he's stepping on someone else's shoes, because automobile industry generates a lot of employment and income, and therefore mixing up policies at that level might be counterproductive, and therefore, as Anumita says, it may just be wiser to focus on car use rather than car ownership or car manufacturing. I think that's probably the way forward. Shrimanta, you have any views on this you'd like to express? Mr. Mishra?
No.
All right. Yeah. And again, I think there are questions which comes back in terms of the frameworks for putting in place parking management infrastructure. I'm saying parking management infrastructure and not parking infrastructure. And then where it gets planned, how it gets put in place in particular places, who will manage it, and regulation, all of that there are multiple agencies, there are multiple plans, like we have land use plan, we have mobility plans, and then now we have PAM. Then how does it all tie together? Any views on that? Maybe Anumita, and then we'll ask Paul, and then Lawrence, and finally Srimanta.
I think
The complexity of institutions and the regulations, and how we can package it as one unit. I think that's.
so. I can only say from the experience in Delhi, where they have, as part of the parking rules, they've tried to define the institutional arrangement that is needed in the city to be able to manage. And for that, they've created a hierarchy of institutional structure. So with the top level, where you have the ministerial level oversight to the administration, and then the more ground level, ULB level approach. But everywhere they have identified all the stakeholders, including the Residential Welfare Association, because it is very clear that in this management strategy, all of these that you have listed here, the municipal corporation, development authorities, traffic police, they all have their respective role depending on what aspects of management you are looking at. So the development authorities are going to be more of a standard setting agency. They are going to set the norms, the regulations for it. Municipal corporations who are actually designing the implementation strategy, and the traffic police along with them and along with the local resident welfare association, they are creating the whole superstructure of how to find local solution, and within that the management framework for enforcing it. So I think the cities will have to work out that that institutional arrangement. In Delhi, it has been codified. Now, in other cities, they will also have to figure out how to do that. But roles and responsibilities will have to be very clearly defined. And the business rules of the agencies will have to be very clearly defined. And more important, another very big part of that ecosystem is in that management, which we are finding to be the biggest barrier, is the whole technical expertise for the design, the devil in the design. Today, all municipal corporations today are struggling in Delhi. They just do not know how to design the PMAPs, right? So that's why we have to understand all the requirements of the PMAP governance and accordingly work out the institutional arrangement for it.
All right, I think, thank you. Paul, any quick thoughts on?
Yes, I don't have the expertise to talk specifically about how Indian cities specifically should coordinate their activities, but as a general principle, I would just want to reiterate the idea that local government, whether it's MCs, development authorities, or traffic police, or all three together coordinating, the primary responsibility of local government is managing the on-street parking, the parking in public places. Off-street parking needs much less government planning than people tend to think. Of course, as a legacy, many cities do own some off-street parking and they should manage that well as well. But broadly speaking, I would say cities can get out of the business of owning off-street parking, and they should, if possible, get out of the business of trying to control how much off-street parking there should be, and pay a lot more attention to regulating the quality and design of off-street parking, make sure it's up to standard. But when it comes to quantity and pricing and management, it's the on-street parking is the primary responsibility, that 90% of their energy should be focused on the on-street parking in public places.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Professor, I'm afraid we have overshoot the time now actually. So
okay,
can we just call for a closing session and ask the Yogan to close the session? Yeah.
I will just do that. Thank you, and I think it has been very interesting, engrossing discussion, and the topic itself is like that. And I'd like to thank Anumita, Paul, and Lawrence for this, and Samantha for this wonderful presentation and responses. I now request Yogan Bowman, Project Manager, GIZ, who actually in my mother tongue would call it as Sutradar. In fact, one who, sitting at the head of office and managing the entire initiative. I think Yogan has been Sutradhar. Would like to invite him to deliver the closing remarks. Thank you, Andrea. Oman, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I try to make it short. What I see is intelligent parking space management can be used to control intralocal traffic and significantly improve the quality of life. Negative influences such as air pollution, congestion, and noise, which are associated with increasing car traffic, can thus be reduced. Without major investments, success can be achieved relatively quickly. The quality of life is increased as parking space management relieves the burden on public space, increases road safety, and freed up areas can be used more effectively. In addition, the environmental friendly networks will be strengthened. At the parking fees, Mr. Lawrence has explained what they have as a surplus every year, will encourage people to walk or to travel to the inner cities by bike or bus and train, and the surplus can be used to improve also these kind of measures. Not to be forgotten is the financial incentive for the municipalities. Parking fees open an additional source of income for the municipalities, which can be used for the necessary transformation towards sustainable transport. With today's event, we want to contribute to make the debates on the topic of parking more rational and objective. Not only in Germany, it's a very emotional discussion. When it comes to parking fees and the management of public areas, are usually conducted emotionally, and decision makers are thus prevented from supporting a sustainable urban transport policy. Especially in the inner cities where public space is a scarce commodity, many conflicts of use and negative effects such as illegal parking and parking surge traffic with the result of a lack of quality of living are existing. Parking space management as part of parking policies, therefore, has been an important measure of traffic management in most major cities in Germany since the 1980s. While hardly any large city in Europe can do without parking space management, the topic is controversial in many small and medium-sized cities, especially in rural areas. In these cities, the car plays a greater role in the accessibility of the city center than in large cities with well-developed public transport systems. The walking distance to important facilities for daily needs is significantly worse in small and medium-sized cities than in large cities. Furthermore, the city centers of many small and medium-sized towns are experiencing a loss of importance. In addition to online retail, inner city retail is also in competition with food discounters and shopping centers on greenfield locations. As a result of these developments, cities are losing their multifunctionality. Measures to provide parking space form an important approach to support accessibility on the one hand, but also to make public space more attractive and livable, diverse on the other. As part of the Indo-German Green Urban Mobility Partnership, BMZ will continue to support Mahua and Indian cities tackling the parking challenges. Thanks to Ms. Chaudhuri, Mr. Bhatta, Mr. Kumat, and Mr. Mishra for the great best practice examples we have seen today. Also thanks to Professor Swami and my colleagues Andrea and Lagu for the moderation. And of course, thanks to the team in the background making the event possible. I hope that we see each other again in the next Mobilogue event. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, if you would want to announce the next Mobilogue.
29th July. Yep. Let's hope we will all meet again and then discuss another topic, Mobilogue, which is covering another topic. Yes. Yeah. 8th July 2021 at 3 p.m. Bus operations, outsourcing and contract management. Yeah, let's hope we'll all meet again. We'll have interesting presenters on that day. It will be, keynote will be by Mr. Jaideep, who is OST and XFU Joint Secretary, Mahua. And we have Mr. Mukesh Kumar, Municipal Commissioner, Ahmedabad, Gerald Oliver, Lead Transport Consultant, World Bank, Mr. Alok Jain from Hong Kong, and we have Mr. Ben Johnson. It will be an interesting discourse on bus operations outsourcing and contract management. It will be moderated by Lagu Parasha and Mr. Gautam Patel. Welcome all of you. Let's hope we join again on July 8th, same time, 3 o'clock. Thank you for joining us today, and have a good evening, good night. Stay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Thanks, Paul. Andrea, thank you. Samantha,
Yeah, thank you.
Mishra,
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mishra.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Fine.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing everything with the presentation. That was a good idea.
Raghu?
For the questions.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.